Argentina, the country that would later become home to the largest Jewish community in Latin America, also served as a silent refuge for thousands of Nazis fleeing the collapse of the Third Reich during the dark years of the post-war period. While Europe was digging mass graves and opening tribunals, clandestine routes were being woven on the other side of the Atlantic. New identities were forged, and passports capable of erasing a criminal past were stamped and sealed. Ports, ships, and suitcases loaded with false names turned Nazi officials into anonymous immigrants. Some lived on the margins, others blended into already established German communities. Many started families and grew old without being disturbed. This story reconstructs the escape map, how it was organized, who made it possible, and why Argentina ultimately became the primary destination.
Gracias a estas redes, más de 5.000 nazis pudieron emigrar a Argentina. Cuando llegaron, pudieron comenzar una nueva vida con la protección del presidente Perón.
When the Third Reich collapsed in the spring of 1945, Europe did not immediately become a land of justice. First and foremost, it became a space of confusion. Millions of people moved without papers. Allied armies occupied entire regions, and Nazi regime archives were incomplete, destroyed, or scattered. In that chaos, thousands of men linked to the machinery of extermination understood something essential. Not all of them would be pursued with the same urgency. The major trials were not yet organized, and Nuremberg would only be the beginning. The hunt was real, but uneven. Some high-ranking figures fell quickly, while others remained off the radar for months or even years. Mid-level officers, bureaucrats, doctors, engineers, police, and civilian collaborators moved between prison camps, occupation zones, and devastated cities, changing names, trading documents, and learning to lie with precision. Time became an ally. Every day without identification was an opportunity. The key was not to hide forever in Europe, but to disappear from it. To do so required a reliable route, discreet contacts, and a distant destination. At that point, flight ceased to be a desperate reaction and became a strategy. The goal was simple: leave behind a continent that was slowly beginning to demand accountability. Among the possible destinations, Argentina emerged as the most attractive, not only because of distance, but because of concrete conditions. It is estimated that around 9,000 Nazis managed to flee to South America, with roughly 5,000 settling in Argentina. Brazil received between 1,500 and 2,000, Chile between 500 and 1,000, and Paraguay a smaller but significant number. No other country concentrated as many. Argentina offered more than passive refuge. From 1946 onward, the Peronist government saw these men as a source of technical and military knowledge. Engineers, scientists, and weapons specialists fit into a project of accelerated industrialization. In exchange for that utility, visas, jobs, and in some cases, informal political protection were facilitated.
Perón quería que los nazis entraran porque pensaba que tenían conocimientos técnicos que le permitirían desarrollar nuevas armas y nuevas industrias.
Así que Juan Perón puso en marcha un sistema muy eficaz para ayudar a los nazis a escapar de Europa delante de las narices de los aliados.
This flow would not have been possible without the rat lines. These clandestine routes connected convents, safe houses, and improvised offices in Europe with Italian ports from which ships departed for the Americas. False documentation, often Red Cross passports, made it possible to erase compromised identities. Behind the scenes operated financing networks, ideological sympathizers, intermediaries, and officials willing to look the other way. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was effective enough to move thousands of people without immediately raising alarms. Meanwhile, South America offered something Europe had lost: space. Vast distances, porous borders, and regions where state control was weak or intermittent. For a fugitive, that environment allowed something essential: dilution. It was not necessary to live in hiding, but to integrate as just another person, a reality very different from that of Germany at the time.
Alemania estaba completamente rodeada. Al norte estaba el mar. Al este los soviéticos llevaban a cabo ejecuciones y los aliados habían concentrado tropas al oeste. Por lo tanto, el único camino a seguir era una pequeña brecha en el sur, a 150 kilómetros de la frontera.
On the other side of the Atlantic, in cities with pre-existing German communities, integration was almost automatic. Bariloche became a symbol, though it was not the only case. There, a German accent raised no suspicion. Social ties were closed, and the European past could be reduced to an incomplete or deliberately vague story. Respectable professions, family life, predictable routines. Normality was the best disguise. Most avoided public exposure, rejected interviews, and stayed out of politics. Silence was a form of self-protection, but also a tacit pact with the surroundings. Neighbors who did not ask, authorities who did not investigate, and a society where horror seemed too distant to disrupt everyday life. Thus, disappearance became stable. A point of departure in Europe, a point of arrival in South America, and a list of names burdened with atrocities that dissolved into oblivion.
Fue desde Roma donde Erich Priebke tuvo la oportunidad de escapar del continente y librarse del juicio. Esto fue posible gracias a la red que había montado Alois Judal. Pero no fue el único nazi que el obispo ayudó. Había docenas más, incluyendo algunos de los hombres más buscados de Europa, como Adolf Eichmann, el Dr. Mengele y Klaus Barbie.
For years, names circulated in whispers like uncomfortable rumors few wanted to confirm. Adolf Eichmann was one of them. He arrived in Argentina in the early 1950s with false documents, settled in the Buenos Aires suburbs, and led an austere, almost invisible life. He worked as a laborer and later for an automotive company, commuted by bus, raised his children, and avoided any public exposure. For nearly a decade, the logistical architect of the Holocaust lived as an ordinary citizen. Until, in 1960, Israeli agents abducted him in Buenos Aires. His subsequent trial in Jerusalem turned him into a global symbol of administrative genocide. Joseph Mengele followed a different path. He spent time in Argentina, frequented German circles, and moved with relative freedom, but chose not to remain in one place. As international pressure grew, he crossed borders, passed through Paraguay, and ended up hiding in Brazil. He was never captured. He died in 1979, drowning on a beach. His name turned into a dark legend. Erich Priebke represented the most unsettling version of concealment. He lived for decades in Bariloche as a respected neighbor, headmaster of a German school, integrated into the local community. His identification in the 1990s revealed just how long a life built on silence could last. And Klaus Barbie showed yet another facet. After passing through Argentina, he settled in Bolivia, where he collaborated with security apparatuses and local dictatorships. Unlike others, he exercised power until he was extradited and put on trial. Each story confirmed the same truth. Escape did not end upon arrival. That was where another life truly began. Now, to understand why refuge was possible, it is necessary to look backward.
En Argentina se podían sentir como en casa. Bastaba con ir a un colegio para entender por qué. Las clases de este país estaban llenas de niños rubios porque desde el siglo XIX, Argentina había sido un destino frecuente para los emigrantes alemanes. En 1945 había casi 240.000 alemanes allí. Les atraía el auge de la economía del país. Muchos de ellos eran simpatizantes del Tercer Reich.
Argentina had been built as a country of immigration since the late 19th century. European waves shaped its cities, economies, and cultures. That tradition produced a bureaucracy accustomed to receiving foreigners and a society used to rapid integration. German communities had schools, clubs, churches, and commercial networks. They functioned as spaces of containment and anonymity. In parallel, the Jewish community grew to become the largest in Latin America, the result of earlier migrations.
De 1933 a 1954, unos 40.000 judíos que huían de la persecución nazi en Europa ingresaron a la Argentina, que ya tenía la mayor población judía de Latinoamérica.
That intersection created a complex scenario, a plural, diverse country where stories of refuge, persecution, and concealment coexisted. The same structures that facilitated the integration of millions also allowed false identities to be hidden. It was not an explicit design, but a consequence of a system built to receive, not to investigate pasts. Another factor takes us back to the 1930s, when the rise of Nazism resonated beyond Europe. Parts of German communities abroad echoed the ideological climate through cultural events, symbols, and propaganda. The regime found admirers among social and political sectors that saw in Hitler an answer to communism and economic crisis.
Los pocos opositores que existían dentro de las comunidades alemanas son los que se corrieron del establishment creando instituciones como el Colegio Pestalozzi o el diario Argentinische Tageblatt, por ejemplo. Pero el centro de la comunidad era pro-nazi. Y después de la guerra, esta comunidad es la que trató de ayudar para poder hacer llegar a aquellos nazis que venían en retirada.
At the same time, Argentina hardened its immigration policies. Many Jews attempting to flee Europe encountered bureaucratic obstacles and rejections. That contradiction left a deep mark. While Nazism gained cultural visibility, its victims faced closed doors. It was not a uniform conspiracy, but a series of decisions that conditioned the future. That prior climate helps explain why, years later, the arrival of fugitive Nazis did not trigger immediate alarm. The ground had already been partially prepared.
En el año 38 hay una circular de Cancillería, la circular número 11, que habla de no dar visas a indeseables y expulsados. Los indeseables eran comunistas, socialistas, los expulsados eran los judíos que el régimen nazi quería expulsar. Entre el año 46 y el año 49, los judíos debieron ingresar al país ilegalmente.
En aquella época era más fácil entrar como un criminal nazi tratando de escaparse que como un judío abierto, digamos.
It should also be noted that for much of the Second World War, Argentina remained officially neutral. That position, maintained until 1945, allowed it to preserve diplomatic and commercial ties with both the Allies and the Axis powers. In a world divided by total war, neutrality functioned as a tool of maneuver. It offered autonomy, but also generated gray areas where oversight was irregular and ambiguity became functional. Neutrality did not imply automatic alignment with Nazism, but it did create a permeable political and administrative climate. Embassies, consulates, and state offices operated in a terrain where priorities were not always clear. Some controls were applied rigorously. Others were relaxed out of convenience, bureaucratic inertia, or ideological affinity. In that context, documents, contacts, and networks circulated that would later be reused for escape. When the war ended, that web did not disappear. The transition from conflict to post-war was rapid, and structures that had operated in ambiguity adapted easily to a new objective, facilitating the entry of Europeans without asking too many questions. International pressure to pursue war criminals coexisted with local interests, development projects, and a diplomacy seeking to preserve margins of autonomy. Thus, neutrality left a silent legacy. It did not by itself explain the arrival of Nazis in Argentina, but but it helped create the administrative and political conditions that made it possible for many to cross the ocean without raising immediate alarms. When the Second World War ended, the pursuit of Nazi criminals did not stop, but it ceased to be the absolute priority. The world quickly entered the logic of the Cold War, and the axis of urgency shifted. The confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union reordered alliances, silences, and conveniences. On that new board, many former Nazis ceased to be seen only as criminals and became useful pieces or secondary problems. International cooperation to capture fugitives was uneven and fragmented. Some investigations advanced, others remained shelved for years. Information was lost, concealed, or simply not shared with the necessary speed. In Latin America, geographic distance and the lack of sustained pressure allowed many false identities to survive intact for decades. Only in the 1960s and 1970s did traces begin to re-emerge. The Eichmann case marked a symbolic turning point, but it did not close the story. Later, official commissions, journalistic investigations, and the gradual opening of archives reconstructed routes, names, and complicities. Each confirmed document dismantled a bit more the idea that these were isolated cases.
Nosotros encontramos a través de la investigación que hizo la SEANA a finales de los 90, que fue una comisión especial para investigar las actividades nazis en la Argentina, que unos 35 criminales de guerra nazis llegaron al país dentro de un total de 180 criminales de guerra, sobre todo croatas y de otras nacionalidades europeas que vinieron a nuestro país.
In the end, a profound contradiction was laid bare. Argentina, a country built by immigrants and home to the largest Jewish community in Latin America, was also a refuge for those who had participated in extermination. That coexistence did not stem from a single cause, but from a sum of interests, silences, and geopolitical priorities that for decades allowed the past to remain suspended, unresolved. When the Nazi escape to South America was reconstructed, the explanation lay not with a single culprit or a single open door, but with the accumulation of favorable conditions. A disordered post-war period, effective escape routes, false documents, ideological sympathies, and governments that saw utility where others saw criminals. Argentina became the primary destination because it offered social anonymity, the possibility of integration, and in certain cases, political protection. What is unsettling is what remained behind. Decades of normality built on invented identities, archives that surfaced too late, and a question that still disturbs. If so many could hide in plain sight, how many pieces of that map remain outside the frame? This brings us to the end. If you enjoyed this video, we invite you to join us in our next installment.